A light autumn rain bathed the streets in streaks of gold, reflected from the stuttering streetlights. The bus stop stood at the edge of a dense forest, eerily silent but for the soft rustling of leaves. Claire pulled her coat tighter around her as she stared down the empty road. The next bus wasn't due for another 30 minutes, and the solitude was beginning to gnaw at her nerves. She glanced at her phone, hoping for a distraction. Just as she opened a message, a low guttural sound rumbled behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. Slowly she turned around. Standing not 10 feet away was a huge brown bear. Its fur was shining with rain, and his eyes, dark and intelligent, were fixed on her. For a moment Claire froze, her breath caught in her throat. The bear took another step closer, his massive paws crunching on the gravel. "Oh, this is it," she muttered under her breath. "The universe couldn't give me a normal Friday night?" To her surprise, the bear didn't appear to be hostile. It cocked its head a little, as if weighing her. Then it snorted and turned, walking away but not back into the woods. Instead, it headed down the road, looking back at her from time to time. Claire's mind was racing. Every survival instinct in her body screamed at her to stay put, but something about the bear's behavior was odd. It wasn't acting like a wild animal. It seemed deliberate, purposeful. And those glances. It almost looked like it wanted her to follow. "Nope. Absolutely not," she said out loud. Yet her feet betrayed her, stepping off the curb to follow at a cautious distance. "This is how horror movies start," she muttered. The bear led her to a small, overgrown path branching off from the road. Claire hesitated at the entrance, the dense foliage looming like a wall. The bear paused, turning its massive head to look at her. For a moment, she could have sworn its eyes said, "Trust me. If this turns into some kind of Narnia situation, I'm suing," she mumbled, stepping onto the path. The forest was dark, the canopy above blotting out most of the fading light. Claire kept her distance, her phone's flashlight casting eerie shadows on the trees. The bear moved steadily, occasionally glancing back to ensure she was following. "Okay," she said, mostly to herself. "You're following a bear into the woods. Great decisions all around." The path opened into a small clearing, and what Claire saw stopped her in her tracks. In the center of the clearing was a shabby wooden cabin, its windows glowing with a warm, flickering light. The bear lumbered toward the cabin, then stopped at the door, looking back at her one final time. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered. The bear let out a low grunt, almost like an impatient sigh, and nosed the door open. He disappeared inside, leaving the door open. Claire hung back at the edge of the clearing, trying to decide what to do next. This was crazy. Bears didn't behave like this. Cabins in the middle of nowhere didn't just light up like some kind of welcoming beacon. And yet something about all this felt orchestrated. Her curiosity won out. She took a deep breath and approached the cabin. The door creaked as she pushed it open wider. Inside, the space was surprisingly cozy. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting warm light over a mismatched collection of furniture, and the smell of pine and something faintly sweet filled the air. And in a great armchair beside the fire was sitting a man. His hair was dark and unruly, his beard thick but well trimmed. He looked up as she came in and caught her gaze in his own, a piercing green that didn't flinch. For a minute neither spoke. "You followed him," he said finally in that deep, silky voice of his. Not a question. Claire blinked. Yeah? He's a bear. Bears don't usually, do that." The man's lips twitched into a faint smile. "He's not just a bear." "Oh, good," she said, throwing up her hands. Because normal bears leading women into the woods was too mundane. The man chuckled, the sound low and rich. "You've got spirit. That'll come in handy." "Handy for what?" she demanded, her nerves fraying. Before he could answer, the bear reappeared, something clutched in its mouth. It dropped it at Claire's feet, and she crouched down to examine it, her heart racing. It was a worn leather satchel, stained and battered. She opened it carefully to reveal a collection of old, hand-drawn maps and a small, intricately carved wooden box. What is this? She asked, turning to the man. His expression turned serious. It's the reason he brought you here. Claire's head was spinning with questions, but before she could ask any of them, a loud crash echoed through the forest. The man stood up in a flash, his demeanor turned alert. The bear growled low and deep, placing itself between Claire and the door. What was that? She whispered. He took down a long, curved blade hanging from the wall, the flickering firelight dancing off its edge. Trouble, he said shortly. Stay close and no matter what happens, don't run. Claire's stomach hit her feet. Don't run? She repeated. What exactly are we dealing with here? A crashing, this time much closer, followed by heavy, thudding footsteps. The man turned to her, eyes fierce. You'll see soon enough. The bear let out a deafening roar as the door burst open, and Claire's world erupted into chaos. The door exploded inward with a force that sent shards of wood flying across the cabin. Claire stumbled back, instinctively shielding her face. The bear roared, stepping forward to block the intruders, three figures cloaked in dark, tattered robes. Their faces were obscured, but the glint of steel in their hands was unmistakable. Stay behind me, the man growled, interposing himself between Claire and the robed figures. What is happening? Claire hissed, her voice trembling. Later. He shot back, brandishing the curved blade. The firelight caught the intricate engravings on the blade's surface, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. The tallest of the intruders stepped forward, its voice raspy and distorted. Hand over the satchel, it demanded. And we'll make your end swift. The man smirked, his stance unwavering. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here. Especially uninvited. The bear sprang without warning. Its huge paw sliced through the air and flung the lead figure across the room, slamming him into the wall. The other two leapt into action, swinging their weapons through the air. The man moved with a practiced precision, parrying blows with his blade as the bear kept the third figure at bay. Claire plastered herself against the wall, clutching the satchel to her chest. Her mind whirled. This couldn't be real. She was just waiting for a bus. She wasn't supposed to be dodging flying daggers in a cabin guarded by a bear and a swordsman. Claire! The man yelled, breaking her spiral of panic. The box! Open the box! Her hands fumbled at the clasp, her breath ragged. She flipped it open to reveal some weird glowing orb nestled inside. It emitted a soft hum, light shifting and swirling in swirls of liquid gold. What is this? She gasped. No time! He yelled. Hold it up. Claire did as she was instructed, raising the orb high in the air. The light grew much brighter, filling the cabin with searing brightness. The robbers shrieked and covered their heads, as if the light seared their eyes through their robes. The bear roared again, its voice a triumphant boom. The light went out, and with it the robed figures. Of them, there was left nothing except the splintered door and a lingering smell of char. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's legs buckled, and she sank to the floor, still clutching the orb. The man approached her, his expression a mix of relief and concern. You okay? He asked, extending a hand to help her up. Okay? She repeated, her voice high-pitched. You call this okay? Who were those people? What just happened? And what is this thing? She shook the orb slightly for emphasis. He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated. Try me, she snapped. The bear snorted, in seeming agreement. The man looked at it once before motioning for Claire to sit on the couch. The man took the orb from her carefully, placing it back in the box. That, he began, nodding toward the box, is an artifact called the luminous core. It's ancient and, let's just say, highly sought after by people who shouldn't have it. Claire folded her arms, her brow furrowed. And let me guess. Those people who just Kool-Aid man through your door? They shouldn't have it. Exactly, he said, his tone grim. They're part of a cult that believes the core can grant them immense power. If they succeed, it won't just be us in danger. It'll be everyone. Claire's head spun. So what, you're some kind of artifact protector? Indiana Jones with a bear sidekick? The man chuckled. Something like that. Name's Elias, by the way. And the bear's name is Coda. Coda let out a low growl, almost as if he was introducing himself. Claire blinked at the enormous creature. Coda. Sure. Why not? In an instant, Claire was beyond wondering about the impossibility of it all. A low rumble shook the cabin. The fire danced, and the orb's glow pulsed weakly. Elias sprang to his feet. They're not done. We need to move. Move? Claire echoed. To where? The nearest hotel? Because I hate to break it to you, but I think your Yelp rating just tanked. Elias grabbed a worn leather bag from a hook by the door, stuffing the core inside. There's a safe house nearby. We can regroup there. Coda will cover us. Coda growled again, stepping to the door. Claire hesitated, but the urgency in Elias' movements propelled her forward. The three plunged into the forest, the darkness illuminated only by the faint glow of the core. Coda went first, his massive form moving with surprising agility through the underbrush. Claire stumbled after Elias, her breath visible in the cold night air. How do you even know where you're going? She asked, trying to keep up. I've been doing this a long time, he replied. Trust me. Claire rolled her eyes. Trust you? I just met you. 5 minutes ago, I thought bears only cared about picnic baskets. Elias smirked but didn't respond. They reached a rocky outcrop, and he guided her toward a hidden crevice. Inside was a narrow passage that opened into a small cave. Coda squeezed in behind them, his bulk nearly blocking the entrance. This is your safe house? Claire asked, looking around the damp, cramped space. It'll do, Elias said, setting the bag down. For now. As he spoke, the orb began to glow brighter, casting long shadows on the cave walls. Claire noticed symbols etched into the rock, similar to those on Elias' blade. What are those? She asked, pointing. Elias followed her gaze. Wards. They'll keep us hidden for a while. Claire slumped against the wall, exhaustion catching up with her. This is insane, she muttered. I just wanted to get home. Elias sat across from her, his expression softening. I know. And I'm sorry you got dragged into this. But the fact that you're here, it's not a coincidence. She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Before he could answer, the earth shook once more, and the distant roar echoed through the trees. Coda growled, placing himself at the entrance. Elias stood, his blade in hand. They've found us. Get ready. Claire's stomach was churning. Ready for what? Elias turned to her, his eyes ablaze. To fight. The footsteps fell, an earthquake in intensity, as they came nearer and nearer. Claire's breathing hitched as the distant roar grew louder. Coda let out a low, deep growl that reverberated through the cavern, and he positioned himself at the door, blocking the opening. Elias clutched his blade tightly. Claire, he called, never turning around, fall back and keep that satchel safe. No matter what happens, it cannot fall into their hands. Claire clutched the satchel to her chest, her fingers trembling. What exactly are we fighting here? Elias spared her a glance, his expression grim. Not the cultists this time. Something worse. Worse? She repeated, her voice rising in panic. What could possibly be worse than knife-wielding maniacs in robes? Before Elias could answer, the cave's entrance exploded in a shower of rock and dust. Claire coughed, shielding her face as debris rained down. When the dust settled, a monstrous figure stood where the entrance had been. It was huge, its hulking form barely fitting within the confines of the cave. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over bulging muscles, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light. Sharp claws scraped against the stone floor, and its jagged teeth glistened with saliva. A revenant, Elias muttered, his voice full of disdain. A guttural snarl tore from its lips as it locked eyes with the satchel in Claire's arms. In a terrifying flash of speed, it lunged. Coda cut it off, roaring as he collided with the revenant. The two beasts struggled, the cave shaking with their battle. "Move!" Elias yelled, tugging Claire deeper into the cave. "But Coda," she protested. "He's going to be okay," Elias said, cutting her off. "We have to get into the inner chamber. Now." The narrow tunnel twisted and turned with them running, its walls closing in. The orb inside the satchel was glowing brighter now. Its hum louder with every step. Claire glanced back, her heart pounding. She could still hear the sounds of Coda's battle behind them. "Why is it glowing?" she panted, trying to keep up with Elias. "The core reacts to danger," he said. "It's warning us, and preparing." "Preparing for what?" Elias didn't respond. Instead, he slid to a stop in front of a heavy stone door carved with the same symbols that decorated his blade and the cave walls. He slapped his palm onto the center of the door, and the symbols ignited. "What are you doing?" Claire asked, looking around her nervously. "Opening the sanctum," Elias said. "It's the only place strong enough to protect the core." With a low rumble, the door slid open to reveal a circular chamber bathed in golden light. Ancient carvings lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal. Elias guided Claire inside and motioned for her to place the satchel on the pedestal. "What now?" she asked, setting the satchel down. "Now we make our stand," Elias said, planting himself between her and the entrance. "They'll be here soon." The Revenant burst into the chamber a few seconds later, its enormous body completely filling the doorway. The creature focused on the pedestal, releasing an ear-shattering roar. Coda trailed in behind him, his fur slick with blood, but fire in his eyes. Elias charged, his blades slicing through the air. The Revenant met him head-on, their clash sending shockwaves through the room. Coda joined the fray, his powerful jaws snapping at the creature's limbs. Claire pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. The glow of the core intensified, casting shifting patterns of light across the chamber. She felt a strange pull, as if the orb was calling to her. "Claire!" Elias shouted, his voice strained. "The core! Use it!" "What do you mean, use it?" she yelled back. "It chose you," he said, blocking a swipe from the Revenant's claws. "Trust your instincts." Claire hesitated, her gaze shifting to the satchel. The hum of the core was almost deafening now, its glow pulsating in time with her racing heartbeat. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and reached for the orb. The moment her fingers touched it, a surge of energy shot through her. The room seemed to tilt, and for a brief second, she felt weightless. Images flashed through her mind, visions of battles fought long ago, of ancient guardians wielding the core's power against unspeakable darkness. As the visions subsided, Claire was left standing a little straighter, her fear replaced by this odd, unnatural calm. Above her palm, the orb hovered, its light wrapped around her like some protecting shield. "What are you doing?" The Revenant growled, its voice mixed between rage and fear. She stepped forward, her eyes unyielding. "Ending this." She lifted the orb, and in one swift motion, a smite of golden light burst from it, striking the Revenant square in the chest. With an ear-piercing scream, the creature was consumed by light until its form disintegrated to ash. The chamber quieted once more, the light of the core softening to a dim as it settled within Claire's grasp. Elias leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. "Not bad for your first time," he said with a tired smile. Claire looked at him, the orb still cradled in her palm. "What just happened?" "The core recognized you," Elias said. "It's chosen you as its guardian." "Guardian?" she repeated, her voice shaking. "I didn't sign up for this." Elias chuckled weakly. "None of us do. But the core doesn't make mistakes." Coda ambled closer, bumping Claire softly with his enormous head, and she placed a hand on his fur, seeking reassurance from the bear's steady presence. "What now?" she asked, glancing from Elias to Coda. Elias pushed off the wall, his eyes grave once more. "Now we get ready. The Revenant was only the first. There are more behind, and they won't quit until they have the core." Claire's grasp on the orb tightened. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: her life would never be the same. The quiet that followed the battle in the sanctum was short-lived. Elias was already pacing, his hand running through unruly hair as the realization of what lay ahead sank in. Coda sat at the edge of the chamber, his big body hunched but alert, every muscle primed for the next threat. Claire was still by the pedestal, the orb still clutched in her hands, its glow faint, like a heartbeat sinking into hers. "We've bought ourselves time, but not much," Elias said, breaking the silence. "The Revenant was a scout. The cultists will send more, and they'll be stronger." Claire turned to him, her knuckles white as they gripped the orb. "So what do we do? Keep running? Keep fighting?" "No," Elias replied, his voice firm. "We take the fight to them." Coda emitted a low rumble, and Claire somehow interpreted the sound into a grudging acceptance. Turning back to Elias, her voice had incredulous. "Take the fight to them? You must be kidding. We have seen what they do. And exactly which genius plan are you leading this charge with the bear and the glowing rock?" Elias stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression softer. "You've seen what the core can do. You wielded its power. If we strike now, we have the element of surprise. We can dismantle their stronghold before they gather their full strength." Claire opened her mouth to argue but stopped. The memory of the core's power coursing through her was still fresh. It had felt overwhelming but also right. Like she had tapped into something larger than herself. "Where is their stronghold?" she asked, her voice quieter. Elias' lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Not far from here. An old monastery in the mountains. It's been abandoned for centuries, or so the world thinks." "Of course," Claire muttered. "Evil cultists in a spooky monastery. Why not?" The trip up to the monastery had been arduous. As they climbed higher up into the mountains, the ground got steeper and even more dangerous. Elias led, his blade strapped to his back. Coda walked beside Claire, his presence a comforting shadow. The orb's glow brightened the closer they got, its hum a reminder that there was much power carried with them. "Why is it doing that?" she asked Elias, nodding toward the orb. "It senses the presence of its counterpart," Elias explained. "The cult has a shard of the core fragment that was stolen long ago. They've been using it to amplify their rituals, but it's incomplete. That's why they need the full core." Claire frowned. "So if they get this, they will have the power to reshape reality itself," Elias said grimly. "That's why we can't let them win." The monastery loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the stormy sky. Crumbling stone towers and moss-covered walls spoke of centuries of neglect, but the faint glow emanating from its windows betrayed the activity within. Claire's stomach churned as they approached. "What's the plan?" she whispered. Elias squatted behind the boulder, scanning over the building. "The shard of the core will be inside the central sanctum. It would be well protected, but if we're able to disconnect them from the shard, they'll drop their lock on the place." "Disrupt how?" "By merging the two fragments," Elias said. "The core will absorb the shard and render it inert. But it has to be you who does it. The core won't respond to anyone else." Claire's eyes went wide. "You're kidding, right? I don't even know how I did it last time." Elias laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to know. Trust the core. Trust yourself." Before she could answer, Coda growled low. The figures in dark robes emerged from the entrance of the monastery. Their weapons flashed in the dim light. Elias drew his blade, and his expression hardened. "Stay close," he said. The battle was a complete chaos. Elias whirled, his blade flashing through the cultists with deadly precision. Coda charged into their ranks, scattering them like leaves with his sheer size and strength. Claire clutched the orb tightly, keeping behind them as instructed, but her heart leapt with every clash of steel and roar of defiance. As they went deeper into the monastery, the air thickened with the oppression of weight. The walls hummed in a hum that vibrated at the same pitch as the core. Claire could feel it in her bones, a vibration tugging at her. "The sanctum is ahead!" Elias yelled, his arm outstretched in the direction of a set of heavy double doors at the far end of the hall. A wave of cultists surged toward them, blocking the path. Coda roared and barreled into the fray, while Elias engaged the ones who slipped past. Claire hesitated, clutching the orb tightly. "Go!" Elias shouted over his shoulder. "We'll hold them off." Taking a deep breath, Claire sprinted toward the doors. They were carved with intricate symbols that pulsed with an eerie red light. She pushed them open and stepped inside. The sanctum was a circular chamber, much like the one they had left, but darker and more foreboding. In the middle of it stood an altar, and atop the altar lay a shard of the core. It pulsed with a sickly red glow, its energy twisting the air around it. "Welcome," a voice said, smooth and cold. Claire turned to see a figure step out of the shadows. Unlike the other cultists, this one wore elaborate robes adorned with gold and crimson, his face uncovered. His eyes gleamed with a dangerous intelligence. "I've been expecting you," he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "The Corps has chosen its new guardian. How fortunate for me!" "Stay back," Claire said, raising the orb. It flared to life, its golden light pushing back the shadows. The man laughed, unharmed. "Do you even understand what you hold? The power you wield? It could reshape the world. Bring order to chaos. And you would deny that? It is not your power to have," Claire shot back. "Then let's see if you can keep it," he sneered, raising his hands. The shard on the altar flared, the air filled with crackling energy. Shadows coalesced around him, tendrils lashing out at Claire. It was pure instinct. The core blazed brighter to life, flinging a protection barrier around her. The tendrils struck it, dissolving into nothing. Claire took another step, determination over her fear. She reached the altar, her shard glowing red against the gold light of the core. He screamed in anger and launched more shadows at her, but they broke apart before they touched her. "You can't stop this," he shouted. "The shard is mine." "Not anymore," Claire replied, and she fitted the core over the shard. The room erupted in light, blinding and pure. The shard dissolved, its energy absorbed into the core. The oppressive energy in the air vanished, replaced by a profound stillness. The man screamed as the light consumed him, his form disintegrating like ash in the wind. When the light faded, Claire stood alone in the sanctum, the core resting quietly in her hands. Elias and Coda burst through the doors moments later, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. "You did it," Elias said, his voice filled with pride. Claire looked at him, the weight of the core settling on her. "It's over," he nodded. "For now. But there will always be those who seek its power. You'll need to be ready." Claire looked into the core, its glow steady and serene. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it.